All right. Good evening, everyone. Just a public service announcement. If you haven't already done so, please remember to mute yourselves to make a optimal listening experience for everyone. Last week in this series we've been learning the great D's of coronavirus, the great debates, great decisions, and great deciders of the coronavirus. It's funny because I was actually just thinking about it on the drive over from shul. I was thinking about how this class has really been a class where we have an opportunity to speak about historic moments in Jewish history, and particularly in the history of Torah Jewry and Torah, and kind of like the some of the highlights in our history of when great decisions needed to be made and things like that. And I was actually thinking about how this is the first mini series we've been doing as part of the Great D's that is happening right now. Because this is a historic moment, what's taking place, and the Torah that is coming out of this period is historic Torah. This is the first time that these shilas are really being addressed. Last week we spoke about the importance and the halachic imperative for us to follow the medical advice, and not only that, but to actually take it to the next extreme, which is to do really everything in our power to make sure we do not spread this disease. And next week we're going to talk more about some of the medical shilas that came up. But I want to speak about this week a topic that became a very hot topic. We referenced it last week when we quoted Rav Schechter's article, when Rav Schechter said that one of the surefire ways to know that something is sheker, something that's not emes, is if it's exaggerated. And he was using the example of davening tefillah b'tzibor is being blown out of proportion and exaggerated the importance of it, as opposed to making sure that we take care of our health and the health of others is something that is much more important and something that we are not emphasizing enough. One of the hot topics that came up was, okay, fine, we understand the decision to close shuls. We spoke about it last week, why that's a necessary thing. Now, that we're even reopening it's very spread out outdoors with the restriction. Okay, we understand why that's important. Fine. But now that we're in that situation, maybe we can come up with some creative ways to have the regular tefillah b'tzibor, the regular davening that we're used to, the minyanim and the services that we're used to. Maybe they don't have to stop. Maybe we can create some sort of innovative ways to have minyanim. So right off the bat, just to give a little bit of a timeline over here, the piskei halacha that about this topic that came from Rabbi Asher Weiss and from Rav Schechter came out early on in what we'll call the Corona era. It came out, before Pesach for sure. We're going to see a tshuva from Rav Schechter tonight that came out. I think it's dated Hey Nisan. So this is a week and a half before Pesach when he wrote this tshuva, and this was certainly at a time where no one would ever think about coming together. In fact, that there was a government mandate, the stay-at-home order that we all had to adhere to. So no question that people were not thinking about coming together physically. So what kind of creative way can we make a minyan? So what a lot of places were doing is that they were making minyanim using their porches. This is still taking place in some places. In Lakewood, it's still happening a little bit for those that still feel as though it's unsafe for them to go to the outdoor minyanim. In Baltimore, it's happening a little bit. In Eretz Yisrael, it's still happening a little bit because there are still people that are not going to shuls, even though shuls are open on a limited basis. And this innovative idea of creating these porch minyanim, where people would stand out on their balconies, and you have 10 men, and okay, great, we have a minyan of people, one porch to the next porch. You have 10 porches in a common area. Great, so we have a minyan. Does that work? If we are going to assume it does work, what needs to be done in order to make it work? So before we even get to the conclusion, we're going to see that there were two conclusions. The two basic conclusions were one, the opinion of Rav Shechter, who said that he does not feel as though these minyanim accomplish anything. One would not be allowed to say Kaddish at a minyan like this. You would not be able to say Kedusha at a minyan like this. This would not be considered a minyan at all, according to Rav Shechter, and he was very strong about it, as opposed to Reb Asher Weiss from Eretz Yisrael, who was very strong of the opinion, saying that this is certainly a minyan that one can rely on and one should be attending. It was one of the areas during this period that they disagreed on, even though they really were standing together, shoulder to shoulder, answering the shilas together. But as Rav Shechter says all the time, MS is MS. And just be, it's not a popularity contest, as he would say. It's we as rabbis have a holy task in order to teach the truth and in order to adhere to the truth and show the way of the truth, which is the Torah, to others. And he feels as though these minyanim are not okay, as opposed to Rabbi Asher Weiss felt as though they are okay. But in order to appreciate it, we have to, as we always do, go back to the original sources. The Mishnah Maseches Megillah on Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Beis has a whole list of things you need a minyan for, things you need to have 10 people for. So the Mishnah starts and it says, Ein portion ala Shema, that one is not allowed to say Baruch Hu, ve'ein over v'fnei ateva. One would not be allowed to have Chazaras Hashatz, to lead the congregation, to have a minyan that we're accustomed to in a shul without 10. Ve'ein no sinas kapeim, you're not allowed to have Birchas Kohanim. Ve'ein korim b'Torah, you're not allowed to have a public recitation of the Torah, reading from the Torah, without a minyan. Ve'ein maftirin b'navi, you're not allowed to read the Haftorah. Ve'ein osed ma'amad Moshe. Okay, fine. There's a whole list of things that one is allowed to do and one's not allowed to do with a minyan. Where does this come from? So the Gemara says, Minahani mili. Where do we know this idea that one needs to have a minyan for these things? Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia bar Abba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar Kra, as it says in the pasuk, V'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael, that I have sanctified myself among the Jewish people. Ko davar shebekdusha lo yeh pachos ma'asar. We see from here that when it comes to a davar shebekdusha, matters of holiness, you need at least 10. Now, how do we know that? So the Gemara says, my mashma, how did we figure out, one to the next? How did we figure out from the fact that God said that I have made myself holy amongst the people, means that we're not allowed to have services that would be considered holy services with less than 10 people. My mashma, the Tani Rabbi Chia, because Rabbi Chia said, Asya toch toch. We learn it from one of the 13 principles that Moshe taught us at Har Sinai, called a Gzera Shava, which basically means that there is a standout word that's used in the pasuk in two places. And it's a unique type of word that is not necessary to be there. Those two similar words in two very different pasuks must be coming to teach us a commonality between them. Asya toch toch. We have the common word of toch in the pasuk we related to before, of nikdashti betoch b'nei Yisrael, that God has made himself sanctified amongst the Jewish people. And ksiv hacha v'nikdashti betoch b'nei Yisrael, ksiv hasam, and it says in another place, hivdilu mitoch ha'eda. God willing, next week's parsha, this week's parsha in Israel, Parshas Korach, that they separated themselves from the congregation. Mitoch asya eda eda. We have another Gzera Shava of the pasuk being used, eda, which means congregation. Fine, the word eda refers to a congregation of at least 10 people, and the word toch is used with regard to kedusha. Fine, We put it all together straight from using the principles that were given to us at Har Sinai. We learned that we need at least 10 people, 10 men, in order to have a davar shebikdusha, in order to have a service that is a holy service. That includes Baruch Kaddish, it includes davening Chazaras Hashatz, it includes those things that were on that list, Kriyas HaTorah, and the like. The Gemara in Eruvin on Daf Tzadi Beis, Amud Beis, says, now hold on one second. Let's say I have a scenario where I have, let's say 10 people standing in, I need 10 people for a minyan, so I have 9 people standing, let's say, in my living room. Here, I'll show you the example of my home and make it easy. Okay, I have 10 people in my dining room. Okay, my dining room, this is my daughter's paint. Those are some svarim. Okay, this is my dining room. Okay, we'll call that the main room. Okay, then there's a small alcove out to my left. We'll call that, my side porch. Okay, so what happens if around my table for davening, I could fit 10 people for davening. I could fit 9 people for davening. But there's the 10th fellow who needs to go into the side porch. There's no room for him over here. We don't fit. Okay? Does that constitute a minyan? So the Gemara says the following. Tisha bigdola, v'yachid biktana. Let's say we have 9 people in the main room and 1 person standing off to the side. Mitzdarfin. It works. It totally works. That's what the Gemara says. They can connect, that they're considered as if they're all standing in the same room. You have 1 person in the main courtyard, the main room, and you have another person off to the side. That works completely. And this is learned out in. It's brought down in Shulchan Aruch, but Tosfos in Maseches Pesachim on Daf Pei Hey says, hold on one second. If we're going to analyze this Gemara in Eruvin, we have to think to ourselves, why is it that it worked? That there were these 9 people in one room, and then there's 1 person off to the side. It can't be that the person was completely separated from them. It must be that they were connected somehow. It must be that the room led into another room. Really, that it was one extended room, but it's just constructed in a way where it kind of becomes its own separate room. As opposed to if they were in a completely separate area, that we wouldn't be able to halachically consider it to be the same room, then it would not be good. And that's exactly what Tosfos says over here. V'nira l'ri, Tosfos says, Da'hachamari le'inyan la'anos yachid kedusha v'yehesh me'rabba mevora. What we're talking about over here, when we can connect people, we're talking about where we want to be able to say kedusha and yehesh me'rabba, meaning kaddish. Ve'en mechitza mafsekes l'Rabbi Yehuda mafsekes kiven dahavi davar shetzarach asara. He says when you actually need 10 people, you can't have anything that is blocking you. Meaning you can't have a wall that is blocking you. So let's go back to this porch over here. Okay, so the porch has a door. Right? So the door right now is open. If I were to go and close the door, so if I close the door, I've just made that into a separate room. So if it's a separate room, says Tosfos, you can't say that person is now part of the minyan. Of course they're not part of the minyan. Who cares if they could even hear you? You're not in the same room. If you're not in the same room, no way would that be considered a minyan. The Gemara in Eruvin was only talking about because of the fact that there was a connection in the rooms. Being that there's a connection between the 2 rooms, fine, then it works. But if there's no connection, so there's no way that it could work. That's what Tosfos' analysis is, and this is exactly what is cited in Shulchan Aruch. In Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Kuf Tzadi, in Siman Nun Hey Seif Yud Gimel, the Shulchan Aruch writes the following. He says, Sarach Yu Kol Asara, that it has to be that the entire congregation of 10 is b'makom echad, is in one place, u'shliach tzibur imahim, and the one leading the congregation is with them. Everyone needs to be in the same place. So if we were to stop right here, so then one cannot even entertain the idea of having a porch minyan, where you have everyone standing on, separate balconies and porches. And, while it seems to be very innovative and you can hear one another, okay, fine, but you're not all b'makom echad. You're not all in one place. And Tosas told us you need to be in one room. And it's exactly what's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. Otherwise, that's not called an Eidah. That's not called a congregation. And as we saw in the Gemara and Megillah, the Nikdashti B'toch B'nei Yisrael, that's the source that in order to have Dvarim Shebekdusha, to say Kaddish, to say Kedusha, to do the things that you need a minyan for, you need to be able to be all in one place. So now if, like I said, if we were to stop here, so then porch minyanim don't have anything to stand on. So the question is going to come up though when we see another Gemara in Maseches Brachos. Take a look at the following. Really, a Mishnah in Maseches Brachos. The Mishnah in Maseches Brachos, Daf Nun Amud Aleph, deals with what seems like completely different topic. This is the topic of creating a zimun, benching, where after a lovely meal, and hopefully soon we'll be able to resume hosting Shabbos meals, and Mirza Hashem, all of you are invited to come join us for a Shabbos meal. So at the end of the Shabbos meal, so what we'll have a zimun, where the Mishnah tells us that if we have 3 people that eat together, so then they are supposed to bench together. In fact, it's some call it a chumrah from the Mishnah Berurah. I've heard from Rav Shechta that he thought that this is just a pashas halacha, that in fact the benching really needs to be all together, which is really the source of the custom, where that first paragraph of benching, which is the oraisa, that is sung all together, because that's really the way benching is supposed to take place, that it's being done all together. So that's the Mishnah teaches us that's the halacha. This is what we do. This is what we're accustomed to. That when we have a whole group together that ate together, they have a zimun together. At least 3 people together. This is either 3 men or 3 women that ate together. 3 women also have the right to do so, the Rambam says. And we know that if you have 10 people, so then not only do you do a regular zimun, but you also do it b'shem Hashem. You do it in God's name, because the Gemara tells us that when 10 people are together, so the Shechina is shora b'neihem. The Shechina is with them. And therefore, we include God's name as well. The Gemara gives another reason why we include God's name when there are 10 people that ate together when we do the zimun. When we invite everyone to bench, that's because it's not right for there to be a group of 10 people and God's name not be mentioned. It's kind of like a rhetorical thing, like how could you not mention God's name in such a scenario? But regardless, the Mishnah then over here on Daf Nun discusses, well, hold on one second. What about our scenario? Shnei chaburos, you have 2 groups. Shayu ochlim bebayis echad. You have 2 groups that ate in one house. Okay, so let's say, like the example I gave before, we have my dining room, okay, and then in the living room, there's another group that ate, okay? Or better yet, this is a classic question that will come up that is dealt with by communal meals, bar mitzvahs, weddings, where we have all these tables around, right? People wash at different times. People, start their meals. It's not, okay, 1, 2, 3, everyone wash. 1, 2, 3, everyone bench. It's not, so scheduled, so exact that everyone's doing everything exactly the same time. People are schmoozing, people are talking. So the meals are not happening necessarily all exactly at the same time. So you have all these separate meals taking place in one room, in one bias. So can they connect themselves? So says the Mishnah, basically to connect themselves in order to be considered to do one benching together. And then if they have, let's say, at the total number at the end to be more than 10 or more, so then they can include God's name, right? So we definitely want to be able to do that. So says the Mishnah the following: Bisman shemiksasan roen elu es elu. When they are able to see one another, so hare elu mitzdarfen lezimun. So then they connect themselves to do one communal benching. So let's say you have the Shavuos dinner in the shul, okay, and the tables are next to one another, even though one could argue maybe those were separate meals that were taking place. But being the fact that everyone's able to see one another, so then, or it doesn't even need to be everyone see one another. As long as one table could see the next table, which could see the next table, which could see the next table, which could see the next table, that will connect them enough that they can include God's name in their benching. That will pick up their numbers, and it creates more of a glorified way that we're benching as a congregation all together. As long as, what did the Mishnah say? As long as bisman shemikzasan roin elu es elu, as long as they could see one another. So now, if we were to take this and get creative with it, we could say, hold on one second. With regards to the porch minyanim, so as long as I could see the guy that is next door to me, and he could see the guy that's next door to him, and that guy could see the guy that's up, one flight above me over there, and he could see the guy that's next to him, and eventually, before you know it, my entire the north side of the building is a minyan with 60 people, with 60 tenants, that all are able to, one guy sees the next guy, who sees the next guy, who sees the next guy, boom, we got ourselves a minyan. So does this work? So you're going to tell me, hold on one second. Seems like a very creative thing, and but we're not benching. What are we doing? We're davening. And we saw already in Shulchan Aruch that the Shulchan Aruch says everyone needs to be in the same room. So take a look. The Shulchan Aruch in another place, the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim and Simin Kuf Tzadi Hey, which is the laws of benching, okay, where he discusses this, he quotes something from the Rashba, where the Rashba took this Mishnah. The Rashba was Rabbeinu Shlomo ben Aderet, who was a mid 13th century and Rishon died in the beginning of the 14th century. He was the chief rabbi of Toledo in Spain. The Rashba has an interesting analysis of this Mishnah, where basically the Rashba says that this is not simply just to say that you have to be all in one room to be able to see one another, but even if you're in two completely different spaces, meaning in the shul when we have the communal meal, so there I understand why we're all going to connect, even though we were at separate tables, but we're all in the same space. But the Rashba says, no, the Mishnah was saying that you can connect as long as you could see one another, even if you're not in the same space. And that's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. Even if two completely different spaces, two completely different homes, you have one person eating on their back patio, another person eating on their back patio, they see one another in Miktzasan Rome Elus, Elu Mitzdarfos Lazimun. As long as they could see one another, they connect. So this opinion of the Rashba has not been accepted by everyone. The Bir Halacha says that the Rashba is a chiddush, even though it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. It's a major chiddush. He writes right over here. He says Achen Harashbash, who's the son of the Tashbeit. So we're talking about 150 to 200 years after the Rashba. He thought that this was not correct. It's quoted by Rabbi Kiva Eger, the Rav of Posen. This is also, the Vilna Gaon thought that this is not a proper halacha, meaning according to the Vilna Gaon and the Rashbash and the Bir Halacha, you need to be all in the same room, in the same building, and then as long as you could see one another, you'll connect. But if you're two completely different spaces, so then it wouldn't make any sense. And he says, "Be'emes Yosef mistaber k'divrayim." He says the Bir Halacha, the Gra and the Rashbash are correct. It does not make sense that if you're in completely different areas that you'd be able to connect yourselves in benching. Now, keep in mind, I'm still only talking about benching over here. We have yet to get back to a minyan and how this connects to minyan. But let's do a little bit of a recap. The recap we have so far is the following. We have the source for any holy type of service. You need at least 10. That's the Gemara in Megillah. It tells us we need at least 10 men. Comes along the Gemara in Eruvin to tell me that those 10 men need to be all in the same room. The Tosos and Psachim learns from that Gemara that they need to really be in the same room, meaning even if they're connected somehow, but they don't actually, they're not actually in the same physical space, it's not going to be good. That's quoted in Shulchan Aruch, that Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo says that they need to all be in the same room. But then we brought up the idea of by benching, though, they don't necessarily be in the same room, according to the Rashba. The Mishnah says as long as they could see one another. The Rashba says, okay, see one another even if you are in completely different spaces. You could be, yards away from one another in a completely different house. As long as you could see one another, that is enough to connect your meals. However, the Gra and the Bir Halacha have disagreed with that. Let's connect these two ideas and see if there is basis to be able to connect them. So the Shulchan Aruch the Mishnah Berurah right over here. The Mishnah Berurah says that if that with regard to a minyan, he quotes from the Chai Adam that the same would be true, meaning that even though the Gemara in Eruvin seems to say that they all need to be in the same room, in order to really fulfill on a base level the mandate of Dvarim Shebekdusha, you need to at least just be able to see one another. And this is a big kula, this is a big leniency, not something that's relied on most of the time. This is a leniency that was brought down by the Chida and quoted in the Shari Tshuva right over here. The Shari Tshuva was written by Rav Ephraim Zalman Margolius, who him and his brother wrote a number of different works. The Shari Tshuva, the Shari Ephraim, they were Rabbanim they were Talmidim of the Gra. They were on the front lines fighting Reform Judaism. So they over here they say that as long as you could see one another using that opinion that's found by the Rashba, even if you're in two completely different spaces, he says, Marapan of Derech Halon, you could see each other through a window, that's good enough. He says, why? Shelo Yispatlu Arbayim Yom, in order that 40 days do not pass, Melomer Kadosh V'Kedusha. Says the Shari Tshuva, that 40 days that go by without saying Kadosh V'Kedusha, that's too much for our neshamas to handle, that's too much for Klal Yisrael to handle, and therefore, we could rely on just being able to see one another, even when we're not in the same room in order to make a minyan. And the Gemara in Eruvin and Tosos and Psachim, while it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch, it's not necessarily agreed on by everyone that's a absolute necessity, and therefore under these circumstances, not a big deal. But Rav Shechter thought that this was a major stretch. Rav Shechter thought that this is not the practice that should be taken on, and Rav Shechter felt as though we have the Gemara in Eruvin that tells us that we need to all be in the same room. It's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. It's pretty pashut. He felt that we need to definitely be all in the same room, and he says more than that, you can't really compare benching and having a minyan. Having a minyan is what we call the davar shebekdusha, which is a unique type of a halacha. As opposed to benching is not a davar shebekdusha. It's a completely separate thing. And therefore, who's to say that we're just going to connect the two of them to make it that we could have a porch, a type of an innovative porch minyan. Says Rav Shechter the following. This is a tshuva that he wrote, as I mentioned, on the 5th of Nisan of this year. He writes, "Shekol echad mispal levado bebeis almer pesach." He says that a question came up about whether or not people can daven on their own from their porches. V'chol amar pasos smuchos hahadadi ba'ofen shemiktsasam rom elu es elu. He says that, and then there are other porches that people will be able to see one another on. Yeshiratu lomar shemitztarfim la'asara lomar dvarim shebigdusha v'chazar tzashatz. He says that there are those poskim that want to say that you are able to have a minion under those conditions. Alpi divrei Mishnah Berurah, according to the Mishnah Berurah that we just saw, the Chavetz Chaim says shehisik shebemakom hadchak efshar sheyesh lahakel. Remember, we saw that the Shari Tshuva said that because we don't want to go 40 days, shelo yispatlu arba'im yom alomer kaddish v'kedusha, so we don't go 40 days without kaddish, without kedusha. Therefore, we could be lenient under extreme circumstances to create a porch type of minion. He says, "Achen kulazu kasha moed." Says Rav Shechter, however, this leniency is very difficult, he thinks. Da'akol miyusad ala dina mofia b'mishnah brachos, because it's all based on a halacha of benching, which really is nothing to do with anything having to do with dvarim shebigdusha. He says that the Rashba thought that they're connected, but they're not really connected. It doesn't make any sense. Pashas kol ha'gemaros. He says all the Gemaras, the Gemara in Megillah, the Gemara in Eruvin, Tosas and Psachim. Remember, we saw all those sources, all those primary sources pointing to the fact that they need to all be in one room, and therefore he does not see how this leniency has really anything to stand on. Rav Shechter just uses this opportunity to point out two other important things that people sometimes make a mistake about. He says, "V'harbe pa'amim k'she'osem minyan bebeis ha'avel," that if you have a shiva house, often Rav Shechter says that this issue will come up. Why? K'shehashnayim kitikunam. He says, he adds in a line over here, he says, like in the way that we used to have shiva homes where people would actually come to the house and to have minyanim there, but unfortunately right now it's just not the scenario. He says that the chadarim shama loko kakedolim. He says very often the homes in the house are not very large and not everyone can fit. V'yesh shama mispalim becheder echad v'shiva becheder hasheni v'somchim al kach sherom elu es elu. He says that there are people davening in separate rooms in the house, and being that some people see one another, that's enough to connect them. Rav Shechter thinks as though he says that he doesn't feel as though it's correct, that you either need to set up the house in such a way that you can do it, that there will be enough that 10 people can fit in one room. And if you can't set it up in a way where 10 people can fit in one room, so then you're not able to have a real minyanim there. That's the first point Rav Shechter makes. And then the other thing Rav Shechter points out, he says often what will happen as well is that you'll have exactly a minyan of people in shul, and that people end up congregating in the women's section to daven. They like to stand off in the back or in the back corner. You'll find that sometimes people will stand in the penalty box women's section. That's in the pit of the shul, right? That bottom women's section over there. You'll find that during the week where we don't have a lot of women coming to shul during the week. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of men or women coming to shul during the week. So people like to spread out. They like to have their own space. Okay, so they'll sit inside the women's section. That's a problem because they have just excluded themselves from the minyan. They put themselves in a completely different spot. So Rav Shechter just uses this opportunity to point out these two important halachas. But what we've done is we've basically gone through the opinion of Rav Shechter, where Rav Shechter says, black on white, no questions asked, that these porch minyanim do not hold up. However, the Mishnah Berurah thought as though that during a shasat chak, during a time of great distress, which is what we're experiencing, that one would be able to. Rav Shechter didn't buy it. However, Rav Asher Weiss thought for sure that there's no problem. I love being able to show these videos of Rav Asher Weiss. They're awesome.
At length about these minyanim. and the Chatzeres Minyanim. So just briefly, you know, this has become a huge controversy and machlokes, and it's all I don't know why. To me, it's a milsa de pshita that you could be mitzvah from different merpesot or different Chatzeres. And I wrote a few different detailed shuvas, which I will happily send to Rabbi Garazman and make it available to the entire tzibur, to the entire group. The parameters are, you need to see each other, not the entire body, but you need to see each other's faces. Not all the 10 need to see all the 9 others, but each and every one of them needs to see and be seen by some of the group. And you definitely need to hear each other. So if you see each other and hear each other, you are mitzvah. If there's a road between, then you cannot be mitzvah.
This is a very important point, that there are different types of mechitzos, of partitions. There are some partitions which we're more familiar with, which are walls or balconies, right? Where you're in a physically completely separate place. However, there are some other separations that can exist, like the Mishnah in Peah discusses, how you can consider that you can have 2 separate fields if there's a road that goes between them. Now, when I say a road, I don't mean a highway. I mean a road that the Mishnah seems to describe as even, I think the Rambam and the Parish Mishnah over there, is that you're literally just can fit one car, one wagon to go through that area. Is enough to be a road that would separate. So if you have, let's say, like a suburban area with, let's say, like the shtetl, right? Let's say, like in the shtetl, where we all have these big, and for those listening online, the shtetl is a small community in La Jolla, California. Its original name is not the shtetl. That it's, we have all these big porches, right? So that would be a prime example where if we had a street where there were, a lot of us that were able to all go out on our porches to be able to have a minyan together. The problem is that the suburban roads, there are roads that cars grow on and there's traffic on, even though it's minimal traffic and it's very slow traffic, 5-10 miles an hour, people parking, but being that there's traffic there, that would be enough to create those separations like Rabbi Weiss is describing. So what really he's referring to is a scenario like an apartment building, but not across to another apartment building. One high-rise would work.
You need to be on the same side of the street. If there's an alley between one house and the other, one house and the other, they are mitzvah. But not if there's a road in which cars travel or a major walkway. But if you're on the same side of the street, even though you do have a driveway, they could be mitzvah on the condition you see and hear. Everybody needs to hear the shliach tzibur. If you can't hear the shliach tzibur, you can't be mitzvah. And if you are mitzvah, it's a kol dov shebegusha, including berchas koyanim and kriyas Torah. So regarding
practically, though, berchas koyanim, the priestly blessing would be very, very difficult to pull off, because if there's anything that's blocking you from the Kohen, like if you're behind a wall during Birchas Kohanim, you don't receive the Birchas Kohanim. It doesn't work, and therefore you can't even be included in the numbers that would be included in needing 10 to be part of the Birchas Kohanim. So that is just practice. That's just a logistical issue, whether or not you're able to pull it off. It doesn't really affect the halacha, but it just practically, and just an FYI, God willing, next time we're in shul and we actually do have berachas kohanim, make sure you're not stuck behind a wall, that you move yourself in order so that you are you're in front of or behind whatever, the kohanim are facing you. In order so that you can receive the blessing.
In Kriyas Torah, the one that has a Sefer Torah in his possession is Oile Shiva Kurim. And he says the brocha again and again and again. I just want to make one comment.
So this is very important now. And this is actually why I brought this video in the first place. So what, and with this we'll conclude. What we've done tonight is really awesome. Is we took a shaila that I don't know when in history this practically ever came up, but a shaila of really on a very kavius type of a level, in a regular type of a way, that there were minyanim like this going on, of porch minyanim, and the question was whether or not we could really do this. And we have two major poskim who, by the way, you should just know, are also best friends. Rabbi Asher Weiss and Rav Schechter could not be closer friends. They love one another, but they also know that this is not a popularity contest. This is teaching and paskening real shilas that to real people, and therefore are taken with the utmost seriousness. Either one is a proper path. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. That Rav Schechter, Rav Asher Weiss, I'm a Talmud Rav Schechter. So if I was posed with the Shaila myself, if it was practical here in La Jolla, I probably would have paskin like Rav Schechter. But that's only because I'm a Talmud of Rav Schechter, and therefore he's my Rebbe. If I was a close Talmud of Rav Asher Weiss, I probably would have paskin like Rav Asher Weiss. But regardless, they're both 100% emes, because they're both coming from the same place, which is seeking emes. And that's what the whole concept of Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim is, that both are where we can have pluralistic truths in Judaism, as long as they're following the same basic principles to find truth that comes straight from Har Sinai. Listen to Rabbi Asher Weiss's words.
Fundamental difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, and I'm sure the American Rabbanim are aware of that. I don't think I need to give answers to the Rabbanim in America. I have total trust. We have so many Gedolei Torah and wonderful.
You hear him? I don't feel as though my opinion needs to be the one that's followed everywhere in the world, right? I'm paskening for my tzibur here in Eretz Yisrael. And in America, you have Gedolim. He's referring to his close friend, Rav Hershel Schechter. Mamish, they couldn't be closer. And that's fine, because both are emes, and he recognizes that both are emes.
Rabbanim in America. But we do need to take into account the Chilul Hashem aspect. So if you live not in a totally frum community, having minyanim b'shus harabim and out loud might be very disturbing to non-Jewish neighbors. So I'm sure that the local Rabbanim take that into account as well. So in Eretz Yisrael, we're living in Eretz Yisrael. And most frum Yidden in Eretz Yisrael live in frum communities. But even if you're not a frum community, even a non-frum Jew, Savet Nishaten, it's not going to do him any harm to hear people davening. In America, it's different. But I'm sure that the local Rabbanim deal with that question, with the Chilul Hashem aspect. But regarding tziruf, in my opinion, if neighbors see each other.
Then he just emphasizes his point further. But that last point he made is a critical point, of course, which is that we also need to be careful when doing these outward and public forms of service, that we don't do it in a way that could be disruptive, that could potentially cause a chilul Hashem. But I just wanted to close just by reiterating that these shilas that are coming up, that we're going to be discussing over the next few weeks, are really historic. This is the first time in history that we've had to deal with these shilas in a regular type of way. Okay, it comes up once in a blue moon, okay, that has happened in the past. But to come up with, to deal with these things in a regular type of a way, this is really a historic moment. And as we go through the great Ds of the coronavirus, we have to recognize that our Torah Kedosha has set up in it all of these principles in order to do the right thing. We have the emes there. It's just a matter of discovering it. As Rashi tells us on Koheles, that in Koheles, Shlomo Melech says, Ein kol chadash tachad hashemesh. There's nothing new under the sun. Rashi says, except chidushei Torah, novel insights from the Torah, that you're going to be able to find new things. Because at Maisa Bereshis, God created all the material things in the world. Every single thing that was needed to create the vaccine for the coronavirus was put into the creation of the world at Maisa Bereshis. God already included in the Bria. We just have to figure out where it is. Torah, though, these shilas, these are we're pulling out new chidushay Torah all the time, and we are in tremendous debt of gratitude for our gedolim that take on this heavy responsibility, and it's our responsibility to be able to learn their Torah. All right, we'll stop here. I can hang on for a few more minutes if anyone has any questions.